Hello and welcome to Lifetime with Katie. Kind of doing just a little quick video here on one of my least favorite pro-life, and I'm going to put it in quotes, I'll say why in a second, pro-life arguments. And I see it all the time, and what bothers me the most is when it's a really bad argument, and I'll explain in a minute. It's a really bad argument, and I see pro-life people use it, and then I see pro-choice people refute it, which is really easy to do because it's a bad argument. And then pro-life people come to me asking me to kind of back them up or kind of give them an answer to the pro-choice rebuttal, and I don't have an answer because it's a bad argument to begin with. So I'm going to explain why I don't like it, what it is first, and then what are some better arguments or some better ways to talk about the same issues. So the argument that I'm talking about right now is the argument that consent to sex equals consent to pregnancy. And there's a lot of problems with this. Number one, it is not a pro-life argument. It is a pro-abstinence argument, which you could argue are related. The idea of abstinence until marriage is closely connected with the pro-life movement because we understand, okay, if in sex you are creating a new human being, or you can potentially create a new human being, we should take that seriously and not engage in sexual activity and take that risk or take that, have that chance of creating a new human being if you're not ready for one. And so that's more of a pro-abstinence argument, and you would hear the same argument in a lot of sex ed programs in schools, whether or not they're pro-life or pro-choice, just the understanding of pregnancy is a big deal, and you don't want to engage in activity that leads to that. But it's not a pro-life argument because the pro-life position is not sex is bad. It's not, don't have sex outside of marriage. That's not the pro-life position. The pro-life position is that the fetus is a human being, a human person deserving of protection. That is the pro-life position. And so any other argument that distracts from that or takes us in this other direction, it's a distraction and it takes us away from the main point, which is that the fetus is a human person deserving of protection. That is the pro-life position. Now, the vast majority of pro-lifers are also in favor of abstinence until marriage because we understand, if it's a human person, we don't want to kind of, bring this new person into the world when we're not ready for them, we're not ready to care for them and support them. And so we have those kind of parallel ideas, but to confuse them is dangerous. And here's the other reasons why I don't like it. Number one, when we talk about consent, if you're talking about consent to sex, consent can be revoked, okay? And we can talk about consent for anything. If I have, let's say I give consent for someone to use my image, in some kind of media, I can revoke that consent and say, you know what, I don't want you to use my image anymore. You have to take that down, or you have to stop using, my image. I can revoke that. In consent to be filmed, you have, if I allow somebody to film me and I say, you know what, nope, we're done, they have to stop in most cases. There's different situations, but in general, I can revoke consent once I have given it. Same is true in sex. I can revoke consent if I'm engaged in sexual activity and I say, you know what, nope, we're done, I don't want it anymore. I can say that, and then my consent has been revoked, and anything past that, is non-consensual. It's sexual assault at that point. If I say no, if I say stop, and the other person keeps going, we got a problem. So when you compare, consent to sex to consent to pregnancy, you're saying you consented to sex, therefore you consent to pregnancy. Understanding what we know about consent, well then if you consented to pregnancy, but you can still withdraw that consent. And so that's one of the reasons I don't like that argument, because it doesn't talk about the life of the human being that we're protecting. It's this idea of you got yourself into this mess, you got to deal with it. And that's the other problem with it, in my view, is that it is this very cynical view of pregnancy and view of women who are in crisis pregnancies. And as it is in the pro-life movement, we have a hard enough time communicating that we are compassionate toward pregnant women without using this argument. We already have people saying, oh, you're trying to control women's bodies, you're trying to tell them what to do, blah, 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 blah. They try to paint us as these, maniacal, controlling, conniving, old white men who are trying to control women. And when we say consent to sex is consent to pregnancy, we're affirming that. We're reinforcing that stereotype. We're reinforcing that idea. So that's not the point, I would agree that, yeah, if you have sex, you should understand that you have a chance of getting pregnant, assuming you're a man and a woman having sex and they're both fertile and all that kind of stuff. But in general, that should be something that you're aware of. That doesn't help, though, when we're actually talking about whether abortion is okay, right? So this is kind of the other issue with this argument, is that it doesn't give any help, or doesn't help it at all, the woman who is already pregnant. If a woman is pregnant and she is considering abortion and you tell her, well, you shouldn't have had sex, she goes, okay, thanks. I got that part. Like, I understand how I got pregnant. Like, that's not her question. She isn't like, God, how could this happen to me? She's in this crisis. She's deciding what to do, and she's got the world telling her, it's fine to have an abortion. It's no big deal. Abort it and move on with your life. And that's what the world is telling her. And then if we tell her, well, you shouldn't have had sex, we've failed at that point, because she's reaching out for help, she's looking for answers, and we gave her nothing. So I have never seen a situation in which the consent to sex equals consent to pregnancy argument has been helpful or useful or convincing to anybody. Now, I do know a lot of pro-choice people who will agree with it and say, you know what, abortion shouldn't be birth control, and these are pro-choice people who are really only pro-choice in the event of, rape or health of the mother, life of the mother. Their view is that, well, if you kind of got yourself into this mess, then you have to deal with the consequences. But again, we hear that language and we go, wait a second, that baby is not a consequence. That baby's not a punishment. That baby's not just oh, well, that's what you get for having sex. That's not the pro-life view. Okay, and it might be some people's view, but it's not the pro-life view. And if you're saying this kind of stuff, especially if you're saying, keep your legs closed, you know how that happens, don't you? And those kind of things. If you're saying that kind of stuff to somebody, and implying that, like, oh, well, it's your fault you got pregnant, so you have to deal with it, that's not pro-life. You may yourself be pro-life, but what you're saying is not pro-life. So don't use that argument. Please stop. Please stop it. If you're trying to make a pro-life argument, that is. If you're trying to make a pro-abstinence argument, if you're trying to talk about something else, sure, but don't call it a pro-life argument. It's not pro-life. So the final, which, and I think actually the most important reason that I do not like this argument is that it excludes children conceived in rape. According to this argument, if this is your argument for why abortion should be illegal or why somebody should not have an abortion, then if a woman is raped, all bets are off. That child, that human being in that womb, that human person deserving of protection, according to the pro-life position, is now forfeit. If you're using this argument, you're willing to forfeit every child conceived in rape for the sake of your argument, which doesn't hold up to begin with. And so, pro-choice people will come up and they'll say, well, what if the woman's raped? And, and then you're going to have to be like, oh, well, you're either going to have to switch to a new argument, in which case, why'd you make this one in the first place? Or you're going to give up on those children. And then they're going to say, well, what about, health conditions that she couldn't have predicted? She didn't know she was going to have this health condition. And then well, she can revoke her consent. They're going to have every answer to this because it doesn't hold water to begin with. So I really want to emphasize how bad of an argument this is and really ask y'all to please stop making it, and to recognize too, and I want to make sure that especially my Tumblr followers understand, I'm not directing this at any one person, because you would not believe the number of people over the years, and actually today is my 6th pro-life anniversary. So I've been in the pro-life movement for 6 years as of today, as of recording this video, and I should have it out today, so it should actually be today. But this is, in 6 years of being in the pro-life movement and talking to people, and in 6 years of running a pro-life blog where I get a lot of engagement, I get a lot of people talking to me about pro-life issues, I've had so many people, who have come and said, hey, I got into this argument, I don't know what to do now, and I'm stuck, help me. And I go look at the thread, or the messages or the screenshots or whatever it is that they give me. And somewhere in that argument, almost every single time, the person who's asking me for help has made the consent to sex equals consent to pregnancy argument in one form or another. And at that point, I just, I go, I can't really help you at this point. And, and I'll see it too when I'll see a thread that's discussing abortion. And it'll just be this long thread, and I'll see all these things that the pro-choice people are saying that I'm like, oh my goodness gracious, there's so much to unpack there. There's so many things you can say about that. And the pro-life response will be consent to sex is consent to pregnancy. And at that point, a lot of times I'll go back to the original post and I'll start the argument over from there, because I'm like, we're just going to ignore all this other stuff. We're just going to put all that aside and we're going to start fresh, because no, we're not doing that. So I want you guys, and so on that note, to those of you who maybe find yourself stuck in this argument about abortion, and you look and you're like, I don't know where to go from here, I don't know how to answer what they're saying, I want you to stop at that point. Take a look back at where the argument has gone so far, and ask yourself, did I use the consent to sex is consent to pregnancy argument? Because once you've used that, you're going to, if you want to salvage that argument, you're going to need to stop and say, you know what? I used this argument. I realized it was a bad argument. Can we agree that argument is wrong, and kind of start fresh? And most likely the person will be pretty forgiving of that if you admit fault. But I really want people to understand that this can just completely derail a conversation if you start using this argument. And so before you panic, and this goes for whatever, even if you didn't use that argument specifically or went off the rails for some other reason, when you're in a discussion about abortion and it goes off the rails and you're like, I don't know what to do here, I'm lost, stop, look back at your discussion. And if it's online or if it's text-based, that's even easier, because you can literally read back. But if not, just, play it in your head. And if it's a live conversation face-to-face, say, hey, you know what? This has gotten a little bit off track. I would like to take a break and kind of think things through. Is that okay with you? And usually they're fine with that. And if anything, they think that they won. And so you can let them think that. It's fine. You don't have to convince them that they're wrong in one conversation. So, you can kind of say, hey, I need to take a break. And then you take time to reflect. Take time to identify where the conversation went wrong. Okay, where did this go wrong? And it might be that you got emotional and you got upset at them, and it became an argument and not a discussion. It might be that, maybe you cited something and then couldn't back it up, like you gave a statistic or you gave a fact, but then you couldn't give a source. And so now the other person just thinks that you're anti-science and making stuff up or whatever. Or it could have been an argument that you used that you go back and you're like, nope, that wasn't a good argument. And I want to give you guys my real simple test for whether a pro-life argument is good or not. If the argument supports the idea that the fetus is a human person deserving of protection, it is a good pro-life argument, generally. Now, I'm sure there's an exception somewhere, but if it does not, if it doesn't support that idea or even doesn't address that idea at all, it's a bad pro-life argument, or it's not pro-life at all. You have to be arguing that the fetus is a human person. That is the only way, and it is the only way we argue successfully for an end to abortion. You can talk about all the other issues with abortion. You can talk about all the impacts it has on women's health and women's mental health. And you can talk about the abortion industry and you can talk about all these things. But ultimately, when we talk about making abortion illegal, banning abortion, abolishing abortion, okay, at any time during pregnancy, no abortions in all 50 states, preferably the world. I'd love that. If that's our goal, we have to be making the case for the humanity and personhood of the fetus. That is the only way. Okay? So that is our only goal. Now, along with that, we are caring for the mother, we are caring for all life, we are pro-life people, we care about all lives. But when we're talking about abortion, we are focused on proving the personhood of that child. Because once you prove the personhood of that child, the conversation changes. Because now it's not about, oh, can we kill that child or not? It's how do we support both mother and child? How do we support everybody, every person involved in the situation, including the child? Because now we're having a constructive conversation about how do we support everybody, how do we meet everyone's needs, rather than should or shouldn't we kill this person or kill this fetus. So we need to shift our focus and stop getting distracted, because the pro-choice movement will try to distract us. They will take us off onto the rabbit trail of what about rape? They'll take us off onto the rabbit trail of, women's health and what about health concerns? They'll take us off on the rabbit trail of, bodily autonomy. And our focus needs to stay on that human fetus being a human person. That's where we have to stay there, and we have to get back there if we get dragged off in the wrong direction. We have to always bring it back to that point. That is our talking point. We have all these other things to help support it, but we have one talking point. Okay. So thank you very much. I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that you enjoyed this. Please hit like, hit subscribe, and follow me on Tumblr at prolifeproliberty.tumblr.com. Most likely you already do. That's most likely how you're seeing this video in the first place. But if you're not, go ahead. And I also have a Cafe Press shop now, which I will link in the description, where you can get some cool pro-life t-shirts and stuff. 90% of everything I receive, Cafe Press takes their cut, and then I get my cut. 90% of my cut will go to Heartbeat International. So, supports a cause, gets you cool pro-life stuff. So check that out in the description.